going to get the money to help the people, help the victims in New York, but also get the money to carry on whatever military operation he wants.
Well, let's talk a little bit more, Tim, about that military response. As you well know, the president's national security team is full of very opinionated individuals, and they don't always agree with everything. Pentagon Secretary Rumsfeld and Condi Rice, who's the National Security Advisor, General Colin Powell, knowing the personalities that involved and the options that may be available, do you have any thought as to what kinds of military options they might be thinking about?
The Powell Doctrine is use more force than you need to carry out any operation.
But he also advocates a clear exit strategy as well.
Precisely, and that's what's difficult about dealing with terrorists. And this is where it gets very, very tricky. If in fact Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan, in the mountains, and we demand that the Afghan government turn him over and they say no, what do we do? Do we bomb Kabul in Afghanistan, or do we try to send in troops to seek out Osama bin Laden? No one really thinks the latter is something that can be carried out, but you can make the government of Afghanistan pay a price. The second part of this, however, and this is what policymakers get paid to think about, and this is very, very dicey. Osama bin Laden is relatively popular in certain neighborhoods in the Middle East this morning. There has been a series of unrest in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and right now it's a very delicate time and a very delicate matter. If in fact we assert ourselves militarily, will that cause upheavals in those states which have been relatively pro-West, if you will?
Or those situations that were quite rocky, and this could make even rockier. We showed videotape, as you know, of the Palestinians having a party basically following these attacks.
Katie, over the last several weeks, there has been suggestions of near uprisings in Jordan. The head of the intelligence unit in Saudi Arabia quit without any explanation. Egypt has always teetered and has been our most loyal supporter and ally in the Arab world. And we have to be very, very conscious of this. Every pool shot the president makes, if you will, is going to be a 2 or 3 bank shot with all sorts of unintended consequences that have to be tried to be thought out before you do something quickly and arbitrarily.
The situation, Tim, is so complex.
Oh.
Every way you look, and I'm stating the obvious, but the challenges that George W. Bush is facing right now are staggering.
Absolutely. If you look at just what he has said last night and repeated again this morning, he has laid out and drawn a line for our government vis-a-vis terrorism. He now has to execute. And that is extremely difficult, and as you say, extremely complicated, because unlike Pearl Harbor, we knew who the Japanese were. We knew who Saddam Hussein was when he went into Kuwait. We knew who Adolf Hitler was. This is something, is a little bit more, as he said, a dark enemy and difficult to get our hands around. And if we're going to go after countries that, quote, harbor terrorism, it is going to be an enormous undertaking, and one that is going to have extremely significant and dangerous strategic implications.
And Tim, you need support for actions like that, and at the moment Congress is united behind him. The American people, after seeing the images that we've shown over the last day, are certainly united, but as we all know in Washington, support can be fleeting. And if he makes a decision and his advisors come up with a plan that gets U.S. troops involved and American soldiers start dying, or, as Katie talked about before, retaliation occurs, how long does he have that support of the American people and of Congress?
And how long does he have the support of our allies? Matt, remember after the Persian Gulf War, after we had Saddam removed from Kuwait, everyone said, never again, we will stand up, we will drive him out, he'll eventually have to leave. What's happened now? We're practically alone in trying to enforce sanctions against Saddam Hussein.
Yes, but Tim, at the same time, I mean, we have seen almost worldwide condemnation of this attack, and people from all corners of the world seem to be rallying behind the United States versus the coalition that had to be carefully crafted by George W. Bush's father, President Bush, during the months leading up to the Gulf War.
But Katie, if we're going to view this, and this is what policymakers are debating this morning, as a true assault on our democracy, on our values, on our institutions, then the response is going to have to be massive and even disproportionate. It can't just be a pinprick bombing, Sarah, there, take that, as we tried to do after previous embassy bombings. And if we do have massive and disproportionate, will the rest of the world stay with us? And what happens to Pakistan, a neighbor of Afghanistan? What happens to India? Both Pakistan and India, nuclear capabilities. This is enormously delicate, intricate, and difficult. This is why George W. Bush has now stepped into a chasm that is going to be extraordinary, which will define and make or break his presidency.
And you mentioned countries like Pakistan. You know, you worry about these rogue nations that might have nuclear capabilities. That you say this opens up a proverbial and very dangerous can of worms.
There's no better way to say it than just that. It has totally changed the debate in Washington, the tone in Washington. Nothing has become more important than this. In an interesting way, it has united Congress and the parties and the country. But now comes the hard part.
Yeah, Tim, let's go back to Campbell Brown at the White House. Campbell, one of the messages the president seemed to be trying to communicate in his comments just now is to the American people who are looking for quick revenge or quick retaliation that it's not going to come quickly. He said we've got to be patient, we have to be focused, and he talked, as Tim just mentioned, that we have to rally the world. And when he's talking about building a coalition, that takes time.
Absolutely, and he's asking the American people to be patient with him. This is not a president who has so far been able to rally the world, as we've seen on his trips overseas. There has been criticism of him by Europeans, by Mideast leaders for how he has handled the situation in the Mideast. Obviously, right now, given what's happened, you're seeing people rally around the president, but at the same time, this is a long-term problem. This is not something that's going to be resolved anytime soon, and he not only has to convince the world, but keep the American people on board. And one thing the White House is very concerned about now is the image he is projecting. There have long been concerns about his ability to project sort of authority and a presidential air as they have worked with him on his speeches, on using a teleprompter. Now it is absolutely critical that he convey a sense of confidence that the situation is under control given what's going on. And in addition to planning for whatever retaliation the U.S. opts to take, he has to continue to reassure the American public that this is a White House that is firmly in control of the situation. Matt?
Yeah, it's gut check time. Campbell Brown at the White House. Campbell, thanks very much. Katie?
All right, Matt, many of the victims from the World Trade Center bombing, or actually crashes, have been sent to St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. Mark Ackerman is the senior vice president at the hospital. He has been there all night long. Mr. Ackerman, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Katie.
Good morning. Tell me what the situation is at St. Vincent's right now.
Well, we've received 365 of the victims since 9 o'clock yesterday morning. In the last half hour, we've received 5 firefighters. These are individuals who are helping with the rescue. They are suffering from exhaustion. They've been on the scene more than 24 hours. They are currently in our emergency room being looked at, and we are working hard to make sure that they're comfortable. They have respiratory problems from breathing all of the concrete in the air, and another phenomena we're seeing amongst the rescuers are abrasions of the eye. With all of the concrete in the air, it's a real problem.
Mr. Ackerman, I know we heard reports earlier today that some of the, I guess a couple of firefighters, I believe, were pulled from the rubble. Have you received any people who were actually in the rubble overnight for treatment?
Not this morning, Katie. We did receive a number of people yesterday, severe burns and people that were in the rubble, as well as firefighters and police officers who were first on the scene and then buried in the rubble. There is no confirmation that there were people pulled live out late this morning. None of the hospitals have received any of those individuals.
All right, tell me about some of the 365 victims of this that you've seen. Have many of those individuals actually passed away in the hospital?
Fortunately, only 4 of those individuals have passed away since they got here. 90 of the individuals were admitted to the hospital, and of the 365 that we received, 64 of them were firefighters and police officers. We have now transferred 2 of our 90 patients who were in the house up to the burn center uptown, and EMS has informed us that we should anticipate patients, particularly rescue workers, throughout the day today. Thus, we are still on standby with our full trauma team throughout the medical center.
So you have about 90 people right now in the hospital who are being treated?
That's correct.
And were the most severely or critically injured the ones who were transferred?
No, those were those who had the worst burns. We only have 1 burn center here in Manhattan. They have been sent there, but we have the most critically injured people, being the closest trauma center to the World Trade Center. Unfortunately, this is our second time with the World Trade Center. The most severely patients have blunt trauma, have had objects fall on them, severe abrasions, and multiple fractures.
But you say in all, when you saw 365 victims, the majority of those people were treated and released, I'm assuming.
That's correct. And I think the thing that's been most challenging for our staff is that we have been waiting for more than 1,000 patients. We were told by EMS originally to expect 1,000 patients, and the sad part of it is there's just that many survivors.
How about staffing at the hospital, Mr. Ackerman? How are you doing along those lines?
We're doing very well. We had an enormous number of people volunteer in the last few days. There was a physicians conference in the city here. We had doctors from Europe offered to help. We have our own staff. We're staffed entirely now. We had an enormous number of volunteers come and help. People wanted to give blood. Neighbors are literally bringing sandwiches and coffee over for our staff. So it's been a wonderful outpouring by New Yorkers, just like it always is in the city.
Bringing out the best in people in the worst of times. Mr. Ackerman, Mark Ackerman of St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan, thanks so much, and all the best to you and your entire team at the hospital.
Thank you, Katie.
5 minutes after the hour now, here's Matt.
Katie, thanks. Two of the planes that were hijacked and then intentionally crashed took off from Logan International Airport in Boston. NBC's Chris Hansen is in Boston this morning. Chris, it appears that if there are any breaks in the investigation in the early stages, they've come there in Boston.
That's exactly right, Matt. Good morning. In many terrorism cases, it appears the first and most significant leads come from vehicles that were either involved in the crime or abandoned after the crime, and such appears to be the case here. Yesterday, law enforcement authorities here in Boston got a call from a man who had flown out on a different flight, got to his location, saw what happened at the World Trade Center, and something clicked in his mind. He said that he had an altercation in one of the parking garages here with a couple of, as he described, Arabic men. And he described the car that they had. When law enforcement authorities checked out that car, they looked inside and they saw flight manuals in Arabic. They were then able to connect that car, a four-door Mitsubishi that was rented apparently right here at the airport, to two individuals, brothers who had United Arab Emirates passports. One of those brothers is an experienced pilot. Now, I can also tell you from here today that they are looking at the possibility of 3 more of the hijackers coming in from Canada and then flying from Portland, Maine here to Logan Airport yesterday morning. Law enforcement authorities and FBI sources now confirm that they believe the 5 of these people were actually some of the hijackers who took over those planes that left Boston yesterday, Matt.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you something, and if this is outside your area here, I apologize, but I've also heard reports that based on the names they think were on those planes, that police are searching some areas in Florida, in Broward County.
They are.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, it's been a little hard to get the Florida information here in Boston, but I can confirm and tell you that based upon one of those names, and because it was familiar to federal investigators, they did execute some search warrants in Florida. To the best of my knowledge, they have not found anything too significant and are taking a look at perhaps a second residence. It's now believed that the person, the target, may have moved.
Right.
But they do believe that he died in the crash.
Chris, obviously this is a breach of security at Logan Airport where 2 of the planes were hijacked. Is that an airport where they take pictures of everyone who passes through security?
You know, you would think that that would be a good possibility, but at a briefing here yesterday, the airport authorities said thus far they do not believe anything of significance was captured on any security cameras in the airport. They have had some problems with security here in the past. There have been some fines. Logan Airport authorities have defended their airport as being as safe as any other, but there have been problems here in the past, and you have to ask yourself, you know, was this just a matter of the terrorists being very clever, being able to sneak one of these non-metallic knives on board, as we've heard, or was there a huge breach here? Were people not paying attention at the security posts?
Yeah,
it's the last line of defense at any airport.
But specifically, my question is there a video camera pointed at the security pass-through or checkpoints that would record everybody who gets onto a plane there that day?
You know, that's a good question, Matt. We were led to believe yesterday that, in fact, there was not. but we're going to have a briefing here in the next couple of hours with airport authorities as well as perhaps federal law enforcement people, and we'll certainly dig into that.
All right, Chris Hansen in Boston this morning. Chris, thank you very much. It was devastating enough to watch the attacks on our country unfold on Tuesday, but for many Americans, the devastation hit very close to home. Moments before jetliners were deliberately crashed, there were a series of chilling phone calls made by some victims aboard the doomed planes. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Alan Hoagland, who got one such call from her son.
Yes, we got a call about 6:45 in the morning yesterday. The house is full of people because we just have new babies in the house. A friend answered it. Carol Phipps went and got Mark's aunt, Kathy. Kathy spoke to him first. He told her, "I love you," and she said, "Mark, we love you very much." And then Kathy ran and got me, and Mark said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham. I love you. First of all, I want to tell you guys I love you." And I repeated, "Mark, we love you very much." And he said, "I'm on a flight from," he identified it to Kathy as Flight 93, United Flight 93, from Newark to San Francisco, and the plane has been taken over by 3 guys, he said, who say they have a bomb. And I asked him, "Mark, who are these people?" And he didn't hear me, didn't get the question, didn't answer it, was distracted. And I asked the question again. I heard some commotion in the background. Mark seemed to be talking to someone else, or someone was talking to him. And then the phone went dead. He told me at some point during the conversation that he was not calling me with his cell phone. He was using the airphone, probably at his seat. We know from other sources that he was sitting in seat 4D, which is first class on this United flight. I'm a flight attendant for United Airlines, as is my sister Candace Hoagland, and Mark was flying on her companion pass. That's how they knew to contact us. It's
Ms. Hoagland,
terrible.
you say you heard some commotion in the background. Can you describe that for me?
Well, the FBI has asked us similar questions, asked us if we heard Mark mention anything beside the bomb. He made no mention of knives or box cutters or guns or any other weapons. He mentioned the 3 guys. He wasn't able to get out word about their description, who he thought they might be. I couldn't make out anything distinct from the background. I was trying hard to hear his voice, which was coming over clearly when he was speaking. He spoke fairly slowly, calmly, although I could tell he was under a great deal of duress.
After the phone went dead, Ms. Hoagland, how long was it after that you heard that indeed that plane had crashed?
The call came in about 6:45. We understand that the plane crashed about 7 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so I guess probably by the time he hung up with us, or the phone went dead, it was about 3 minutes. That he had about 12 more minutes to live, I guess. We hope that Mark was able to take a proactive part in thwarting these hijackers. So I have hopes that he was able to. He was in a good position. He was forward in the aircraft, could probably be in full view of everything that was going on, probably saw what happened in the cockpit. He was a very active, take charge, assertive young man. We have it from other people, another man on the aircraft who called his wife, who said that he and some other passengers were hoping to get at these guys somehow. So this was the only flight of the 4 that did not reach its target, which they believed to be Camp David, and that gives us reason to think that perhaps Mark was able to help save the lives of people on the ground.
Yeah, there was another cell phone call made from someone who'd locked himself in a rear bathroom, who said that
yes,
we're going to have to do something because it appears we're going to die either way, and we have to try something. I mean, it appears that something heroic did take place on that flight.
I firmly believe that. Mark has been in a clinch in times past and has come through with flying colors. He's a Cal grad, rugby player, very assertive guy, aggressive and smart, and we love him very much. We're going to miss him.
I can only You know, I think this might be a weird way to describe this, Miss Hoagland, but the phone call in some ways has to be thought of as a gift.
Oh, we were very comforted to be able to get the news from Mark himself. Somehow it made it much easier to take. It's awful. It's a national time of mourning for all of us, so I'm just one of many, many people. We're so touched by the words of our president, by the words of the Congress people, hearing America being sung on the steps of the Capitol building. It's just profoundly moving for me. I'm delighted to see this rebirth of patriotism among the American people. We need to be strong and work together to overcome this hatred that's taken us over.
Well, you are amazingly strong given the circumstances, Miss Hoagland, and our condolences, our severe and sincere condolences to you and your family.
Our whole family appreciates it very much. I'm delighted to be able to express to the world how much we loved Mark Bingham, my son.
He sounds like an amazing young man. Miss Hoagland, thank you.
Very, very brave and eloquent woman, Alice Hoagland. As the nation tries to absorb the enormity of the attacks in Washington and New York, questions turn now to the official U.S. reaction. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Secretary of State Colin Powell.
Total shock. I was in a meeting in Lima, Peru with President Toledo and his associates when a note was handed to me, and I just shouted out across the breakfast table, "Oh my God." And then the situation got worse over the next 20 minutes as more reports came in, and I immediately made plans to return to Washington. Before returning, though, I did attend briefly a meeting of the Organization of American States where 34 other total states, the United States was 33, were assembled to bring into effect a new charter on democracy. And we did that by just a simple vote of acclamation. And then all of the delegates stood and applauded this statement in support of democracy and to show solidarity with the American people in this time of crisis. Since my return, I've been in touch with leaders around the world, with Lord Robertson in NATO, with Javier Solana in the European Union, and Kofi Annan, to make sure everybody understands that we need a worldwide response to this assault on America, because it's an assault on civilization, it's an assault on democracy, it's an assault on the world, and the world must respond as the United States plans to respond.
Secretary Powell, last night the president said those who harbor these criminals will be held responsible if we believe the man behind this is in fact Osama bin Laden and that the Taliban, the ruling government in Afghanistan, is harboring him. What can the United States do to actually back up the president's words?
Well, there are many options available to us, military options, diplomatic options, further isolation of any country that might be harboring who is responsible. We are not yet prepared to state this morning who is responsible, but the evidence is mounting, and I think it'll point us in the right direction in the not too distant future. And then we will have to not only take action on our own part, but also mobilize the world against whatever regimes may be supporting the terrorists who conducted this act.
So you're saying, General Powell, that as of this morning, you cannot say that U.S. officials believe Osama bin Laden was responsible for this?
Let me just say that there is evidence being developed now, and good evidence. We will be able to make a definitive statement in due course, but I think it is best not to speculate until we do have the evidence all assembled, and we make an informed judgment and announcement at that time.
Secretary Powell, a diplomatic response may seem meager to many Americans who, in a poll this morning, said 94% say they would support military action in retaliation if the U.S. can identify the groups or nation responsible. 92% said they would support it even if it meant entering a war. What is your response to that?
I fully understand the views of the American people this morning. We're mad. We were assaulted. But our spirit wasn't assaulted, and our fighting spirit was not assaulted, so we want to respond. You don't attack America like this and get away with it. And so I can assure the American people that the president, if he is able to get the information pinpointing who it is and where they are and get targetable information, I am quite confident that he will look at every option he has available to him to respond militarily,
Along those lines, is the U.S. government prepared to enter a war against these terrorists? And wouldn't that entail committing ground troops to find them, weed them out? After all, the U.S. has launched airstrikes against terrorist targets in the past, and the terrorists continue to survive, even flourish.
Let's not think that one single counterattack will rid the world of terrorism of the kind we saw yesterday. This is going to take a multifaceted attack along many dimensions: diplomatic, military, intelligence, law enforcement. All sorts of things will have to be done to bring this scourge under control. And it is not just one organization, it's a network of organizations. We have to make the whole world understand that this is something we all have to be involved in, and not just see it as a discrete response to a single incident. We'll do that, but we have to realize that terrorism has been around for a very long time, and it's going to take a very long time to root it out. But what the president specifically was focusing on last night is that there are nations, there are states, there are organizations who provide havens, and these states and organizations cannot be given a free ride any longer. And a major part of our diplomatic effort will be to mobilize the international community against the actions of such states and organizations once we have a clear understanding of who is responsible for this and who might have been giving them haven.
Do you think this was an individual cell of terrorists, or do you believe this could be state-sponsored? In other words, could Iraq or a country like that have been involved in this?
I just don't know at this point, and I'd rather not speculate. I'm sure as the evidence mounts, we will have a better idea of, one, who is directly responsible, and two, what kind of support they may have been receiving from outside that cell, outside that network, from either state organizations or other types of terrorist organizations. But I'd think it best we not speculate too wildly at this point.
The U.S. spends billions of dollars on intelligence. Was this, in your view, a massive intelligence failure, as it has been called?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. We spend many, many billions of dollars on intelligence, and that intelligence allows us to thwart many attacks. There are many terrorist attacks that never took place because of the fine work of our intelligence and law enforcement experts. But in this case, we did not get the cueing we needed. We did not get the intelligence information needed to predict that this was about to happen or be aware of this kind of event coming our way. So I think it's premature to call it an intelligence failure. Let's see what we might have picked up as we go back and do the post-mortem on how this all came about.
Would you agree with your former colleague, General Schwarzkopf, that we need to emphasize human intelligence as much as technical intelligence? And we've got all the technological toys that can be used for those purposes, but what we need are real thinking, seeing people on the ground to infiltrate these groups.
Absolutely, but it's easier said than done. And we do have to emphasize human intelligence because you can defeat electronic intelligence just by not emitting. So human intelligence is very, very important. And I know that our intelligence community is very aware of that. But these are also difficult activities to penetrate and to be able to stay within such a network for a long period of time. But certainly this will be looked at as we review everything we're doing in the field of intelligence.
If we do engage in another country or take military action, what are the ramifications? In other words, if an Islamic fundamentalist group was responsible, what kind of retaliation might we expect, and what kind of access do they have, these groups, to weapons of mass destruction?
Well, let me not speculate as to what we might do. I think a full range of options will be available, and I know that the Secretary of Defense and his colleagues are looking at that. It all depends on where we run this to ground as to what counterattack we might receive from those who are responsible. But at this time, it's premature to start speculating or to identify them as Islamic fundamentalists. Let's just identify them as a terrorist group that can have no religious underpinning, no legitimate underpinning for this kind of action. This is murder, which is against the tenets of every religion, every responsible religion that is in the world, and it is receiving condemnation from around the world from people of all faiths and religious backgrounds. So let's just view them as what they are, terrorist organizations. And I cannot speculate whether they might have access to the kinds of weapons you've discussed, because we don't know exactly who it is yet, but we'll be on guard for that.
Secretary of State Colin Powell, The question on everyone's mind, how could these attacks happen? Michael Hirschman is president of Decision Strategies, a crisis management consulting firm which provides security to corporations around the world. Michael Hirschman, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
You know, everybody has noted how unbelievably well coordinated these attacks were. Did that surprise you, that aspect?
No, it didn't. They're quite capable of putting together teams and training them over long periods of time to accomplish their mission. I would estimate that in order to pull off what they did yesterday, they were probably in training for well over a year.
Do you think that they were able to convince people on the ground, or at least plant some of their colleagues in positions with the airlines to assist them in this endeavor?
Certainly wouldn't discount that. We know that they have a lot of support, not a lot of support, but much support here in the United States. They have cells here, and some of the planning had to have been done on the ground here by associates of theirs.
People are also asking this morning and all day yesterday, how could this happen here in the United States? And I think it's pretty clear. Security in this country, we have an open society, as many people have remarked, and security in general is pretty lax, would you say?
Well, I'll take off my security consultant hat and put on my passenger hat, because I fly all the time. I'm sure you do as well. We both walk through those metal detectors and we see our baggage going through the x-rays, and we wonder why the people really aren't paying attention, the security personnel. Why aren't they watching? Why are they standing around and kind of joking or looking at the ceiling?
They're paid probably minimum wage.
Well,
I mean, they're very low-paid employees.
That's part of the problem, the training and pay and the turnover of those employees.
So you are president of a crisis management that provides security to corporations all over the world. If you were in charge, if you were king, so to speak, what kind of changes would you implement, say, at airports across this country?
Well, changes have to come even before then. We have got to have a far more proactive approach to dealing with these sorts of terrorists and these terrorist activities. In the past, we have been governed essentially by a policy of rule of law. That's what our country is about. It doesn't work with these people. So we have to start first by penetrating these organizations either through human resources or through electronic surveillance better than we have done in the past.
Better, but as you say, that's easier said than done, because you were agreeing with what General Powell had to say, and they have their own counterintelligence units within these cells.
Well, they do, and they know our capabilities. They know what our satellites are capable of doing and what our other electronic surveillance can do, and so they have the resources to put in place counterintelligence and counter-surveillance measures. Here domestically, though, we have got to get serious about security. It seems to me that every time an incident like this occurs, and of course we've never had one quite this serious, but where we have security breaches in the past, everyone pays attention for a couple of months. And then we become complacent again, and that's what's happened. We've become far too complacent in our security procedures at the airports.
So
it's time to pay more attention, to pay better wages to these people, better training,
equipment?
Better equipment, and a higher degree of professionalism. Now, that's going to have an impact on us, because it's not going to be as easy as it has been in the past to get through security. There may be some delays involved, but I think we have to, safety and security has to come first.
When you envision your company or envision terrorist scenarios taking place on the domestic front, did you ever consider this kind of action? I mean, most of us feel that this is something in a Tom Clancy novel or in a summer blockbuster. Was this ever within the realm of possibilities?
No, it was not. In fact, in recent years, we've been concentrating on the possibility of a biological or chemical or even nuclear attack by these rogue terrorists. We had not really considered the hijacking of an aircraft in a suicidal mission like this.
So is there any way, I mean, obviously some of the things you recommend, it's a long process, and Americans are nervous today. Without sounding alarmist, I mean, is there anything that can be done to protect U.S. citizens from further attacks involving innocent civilians?
Well, first and foremost, we have to deal with the source of these attacks. We have got to go after these terrorists where they live and with most extreme measures. Send a very strong message to these folks that we'll not be complacent here, will not lie back and wait to be victims. Secondly, everyone in this country is going to have to be more observant. They're really going to have to use their eyes and ears to help us in the security profession, those in the law enforcement profession, determine what's going on.
Are you worried about, and I can see this coming, obviously, a backlash? Because I know many Arab Americans and many people who are Islamic, 7 million, Richard Holbrooke mentioned here in the United States alone, may be in danger of facing reprisals unfairly. Would you caution people against drawing or coming to snap conclusions as a result of someone's ethnicity?
Katie, it would be very unfortunate. What we're dealing with here in terms of these terrorists are criminals. These people that pretend to be interested in the Quran, but the fact of the matter is there's nothing in their religious background, in their religious philosophy or history that dictates the slaughter of civilians. So we're dealing with a small group of fanatics who basically are deranged criminals, and we shouldn't take it out on the rest of the Islamic or Muslim population.
And in closing, are you shocked that apparently on 4 airlines these individuals were able to board the airline and do this, and apparently, save for the parking lot where that car was found at Logan Airport in Boston, but they didn't seem to raise many eyebrows, any eyebrows?
And I don't understand quite how they smuggled these pseudo knives on board. They may have been made of a composite material that allowed them to get them through the x-ray machines, but I would bet that they had associates here that tried it before and found out it could be done in order to set up what happened yesterday.
Well, Michael Hirschman, thanks very much for being here. I know you've waited a long time here in our studio,
right.
so we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. 30 minutes after the hour now, here's Matt.
Katie, we have some figures coming in from Washington and the Pentagon, and if there is such a thing as good news in this story, this perhaps can be seen as some good news. For the last several hours, we've been telling you that Pentagon officials were estimating that up to 800 people died when American Airlines Flight 77 deliberately was crashed into that building. The new estimates coming from the Pentagon officials are that about 100 military and civilian personnel were killed in the attack against the Pentagon. According to officials, about 50 Navy, 50 Army, and 7 Defense Intelligence officials are believed to be dead. Notification of family members has already begun. However, they do warn that an exact number won't be known until the investigation is completed. That could take upwards of a week. Switching back to New York City and the World Trade Center disaster, Jason Holmes is a broker for the Aon Corporation, which employs more than 1,000 workers on the upper floors of Tower Number 2. He was on the 103rd floor of 2 World Trade Center when the first terror attack took place. Jason, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just be sure we understand this. Tower Number 2, which was the second tower to be hit, but the first tower to collapse.
Well, that's correct.
You're on the 103rd floor sitting at your desk. What's the first you realized that something was terribly wrong?
Well, I guess I heard a noise. The lights flickered and the computer flickered, and I heard people screaming, so I went out into the hallway and looked out the window and saw the One World Trade Center on fire and paper flying everywhere. So a woman I work with told everybody to start going down the stairs, and we did. We got down to about the 80th floor, and I think that's when I heard the loudspeaker come on, and they said it was an isolated incident in One World Trade Center, and we could all return to our offices.
So now, if you had heeded that announcement and turned around and gone back up to your desk some 20 floors above,
I guess I wouldn't be here right now. Yeah.
you continued down. Did
Continued
most
down.
people continue down
I
the
think
stairwell?
most people were pretty frightened, so we kept going down.
You said there was screaming, panic.
Yeah, at the very beginning it was a lot of panic, and a lot of people started asking people to calm down, and then it got pretty orderly. And it's a lot of stairs to climb down, so everybody was just going down as fast as we could.
It's hard to estimate exactly where the plane hit Tower Number 2, but it must be about the 70th or 80th floor. What was it like in the stairwells when you reached the point of the building where the impact had occurred?
Well, I think it was pretty close to where it occurred because we heard a loud noise, and the walls started caving in and cracking, and it was quite frightening. We just kept on moving down, but for quite a few floors underneath, you just saw the cracks going down the walls. And I guess it took almost a half an hour to get out of the building.
When you got down, people were telling you get away from the building, weren't
Yeah,
they?
the police and emergency people were asking us to get away from the building and leave the city, actually,
And not to look up,
and not to look up. And
which of course most people would.
I certainly did, and that was, I think that's when I first felt the terror that, you know, I was right there in that building and saw all that was happening. We tried to move away, and we were going. They were pushing us towards the water, and then I was with a friend, a colleague, who his fiance worked with us, and we were trying to find her.
She
in
was
the
on the
crowd.
105th floor?
105th floor, in a meeting with about 10 other colleagues, and she's the only one that we know of that got out of that meeting.
How far were you away from the building when it collapsed?
We were close to the Brooklyn Bridge. We had gone actually back towards the building looking for Jen, and then we saw the building start to collapse and saw the clouds coming, and we started to run over the bridge.
You had to look at the building and kind of pinpoint where you had been sitting only moments earlier, and just what was your reaction when you saw that part of the building disappear and head for the ground?
I was praising God that I was out. I prayed the whole way down, and praying for all the people that I work with that I don't know where they were. It was just, I think I was thinking more of them and praying that they were going to be okay than anything else.
Yeah, about 1,000 employees of the Aon Corporation. I know you wanted to just give a quick phone number for people who are looking for loved ones.
There's a number to call for the Aon employees and their families. It's 866-256-4154. And you can call that number, and they're very helpful there to help locate people if anybody's called in, friends and family.
I know your apartment is fairly close to the
Yeah, I
World
haven't been
Trade.
able to get home yet, so I've borrowed some clothes to come out here today.
Well, Jason, we're happy you're all right.
Thank you.
There is no official count of the injured from Tuesday's terrorist attacks here in New York City and Washington and outside of Pittsburgh, but the American Red Cross is mobilizing its efforts to assist victims in all cities. Frank Donahue is part of the American Red Cross Disaster Response Team. Frank, good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Matt.
What exactly happens when something like this occurs? When you get the first word, how do you mobilize?
Immediately, as certainly here in New York, the Greater New York Red Cross worked closely with emergency management, was on the scene right away, as we were a number of years ago during the other bombing at the World Trade Center. When I arrived yesterday around noon, I got very close to the World Trade Center, and Red Cross operations were already in place. We were in the midst of feeding and helping firefighters, being a place where people could go when they evacuated buildings and neighbors, and directing people to safety primarily. Last night, putting up shelters, about 13 shelters in Lower Manhattan, as well as feeding about 10,000 firefighters and emergency workers throughout the night.
I know it's important for you when you get a team on site to understand the lay of the land and understand what you're dealing with. In some strange way, did the disaster in 1993, the bombing of the World Trade Center, prepare you for the logistics you'd face in this one?
The American Red Cross has clearly been getting ready, if you will, and being prepared for whatever kind of disaster of terrorism, for example, that America might face. And that's much a part of our disaster preparation, has been for a number of years, and certainly Oklahoma City got us ready.
What about getting facilities to the location? The bridges were basically closed. A lot of the roadways were closed. The roadways that weren't closed were jammed with emergency vehicles. How'd you get the forces to the scene?
I got in from Philadelphia very quickly, and other Red Cross workers from around the country. We had about 1,000 volunteers right here from Greater New York Red Cross that were on the scene, and a lot of supplies at the Red Cross in here in Greater New York as well. So those folks were already on place. Another big piece of it is what Jason's kind of going through today, and so many of us are facing, is the whole mental health piece. How do we help people deal with what they're going through? And we have volunteers not only here in New York, but at LAX and at Boston and at Reagan
Just
Airport.
circulating? I mean, are they looking to talk to people? Are they waiting for people to approach them?
Certified, trained mental health workers, all licensed mental health workers that are working through the Red Cross in all those chapters and in all those areas, helping people kind of deal with what we're all dealing with today when we hear stories like Jason's and so many others.
We've been talking to officials at St. Vincent's Hospital and some other hospitals in the area. They are saying that blood is a concern, especially we have to keep in mind that because planes are not flying, some of the blood that's in other cities that could help here in New York and Washington not getting in. What's the situation right now?
The American Red Cross has about 50,000 units of blood on standby that can come into New York at a moment's notice when they need the blood. Right now, as you've indicated, not many folks have made it to the hospitals for needing those kinds of transfusions. We're asking people to give blood, to call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. This should be a reminder to all of us that the blood supply in New York and in the East Coast, the most populated part of our country, is always low. And this is a reminder to all Americans that this is a duty that all of us have, to give the gift of life, and it's a great opportunity to do that.
Let me give that number one more time. Again, the number for donating blood to the American Red Cross is 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. There's also another number here that for the New York City region. You can call 1-800-692-5663. Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross, Jason Holmes, thank you both very much.
Thanks, man.
Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you very much. On the investigative front, there's some interesting information coming from NBC's Kerry Sanders. Kerry tells us that FBI agents this morning carted away 8 to 10 boxes of records from the Venice Flying School in Venice, Florida. According to a bookkeeper at the flying school, agents interviewed people there for about 3 hours. And this bookkeeper tells NBC News that from July of last year through January of this year, 2 Arab men took classes to get their commercial flight rating. Both students said they were cousins. They gave their home address as a street in Hamburg, Germany, and the photos of both students have been confiscated by the FBI. For a short period of time, they lived with Charlie and Drew Voss. Drew says she kicked them out after about a week because they were rude. She said that both men claimed they were German. One, whose name was Atta, said his name was Otto. They purchased a car while in Venice, Florida, and used the Voss address, even though they didn't live there anymore. And school officials say they stayed to themselves and did not mingle with the other students. So again, FBI agents have carted away 8 to 10 boxes of records from a flying school in Venice, Florida. Meanwhile, no one knows yet how many people were killed in the attack on the World Trade Center here in New York. The southern part of Manhattan has been closed to everything but emergency personnel. NBC's Soledad O'Brien is at a makeshift trauma center set up at Chelsea Piers on the Hudson River. Soledad, good morning.
And good morning to you, Katie. And actually, at this hour, the Chelsea Piers has now been shut down as a triage center. What they've decided to do instead is to basically facilitate the sending out of the doctors and the nurses and the medical personnel, the volunteers who come here. So they come here, they check in, they're registered. But inside, the doctors tell us it is this ominous silence. Of course, hundreds of beds set up to treat patients that they expected would be coming in overnight. Those beds set up on basketball courts, the beds set up in the studios that are here at the Chelsea Piers. No patients have come in. That is not a good sign. They've decided to shut it down as a triage center, basically use it as an organizational center. In addition, here they are accepting clothes and food and water. And also we are told that this will be the location of a secondary morgue, the primary morgue, of course, over at the coroner's office on the far east side. We're on the west side. The doctors, as we mentioned, had been told, some of them this morning, not to come because there are just not enough patients. There are no patients to treat. In fact, the doctors say the only people they're seeing are other doctors and other medical personnel. It is, in their estimation, just a really ominous sign of what is to come, meaning that there are not many injured being brought in as they expected. They thought that they would be treating hundreds of wounded. They are not seeing that at all, and they are really, at this point, expecting the worst case scenario. So that's what's happening here at Chelsea Piers, which has now been shut down as a triage center, really just an operational heart for the city's medical personnel at this time.
So
Katie?
Soledad, the doctors and nurses and medical personnel who report there will be dispatched to other locations where they may be needed?
Absolutely. In fact, they're using a lot of the city buses that they're not using around the city, and the city streets are, West Side Highway, of course, not that quiet because the ambulances are lined up and down, but the other city streets, as we walked here, nobody's on the streets. So many of the city buses are actually, we see them come in, they drop off medical students, nurses, doctors, a lot of them carrying those orange boxes, which are essentially these mobile surgery kits. There are some 200 tables inside, each one ready to go for a surgeon who could provide surgical experience for a patient. Again, no patients at this hour to treat.
So they reported to duty, anxious to help, and sadly, tragically, there was no one to help, but perhaps there will be at other locations throughout the city. Soledad, thanks so much. 42 minutes after the hour. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. CNBC's Ron Insana covers the markets and was at the World Trade Center when one of the towers collapsed. Ron, good morning again.
Good morning,
to have
Matt.
you here. Let's just try and make people understand what types of companies are there, how big a presence many companies had in both of those towers. Give me a rundown if you can.
Well, there are financial firms, brokerage houses like Cantor Fitzgerald, like Morgan Stanley, which was the largest single tenant in the World Trade Center. There are insurance companies, there are actually Chinese trading outfits, there were doctors' offices, law firms, a whole host of firms that handle what they call back office activity for Wall Street, the processing of trades, clearing and settlement, the type of paperwork that goes along with the vast securities trading apparatus that's in Lower Manhattan.
Before I get to what is, I think, one of the most disturbing pieces of information that I know you have, and this may seem superficial at the moment, the records kept in those companies' computers and files, these are personal financial records. They have been obviously lost.
Yep. Now, many firms back up their systems in the financial community and have off-site a whole host of computer support operations that can generally be used during times of stress. We don't know necessarily that that's the case for a lot of these firms, but they try to back up everything they have in one way or another.
One company you mentioned a second ago, Cantor Fitzgerald. What kind of firm was that?
It's a broker-dealer, very active in NASDAQ stocks, had 850 people in the tower. As of this moment, they have been able to locate 3 survivors among the 850. Cantor had a rather large presence. They were on the 85th floor or thereabouts, so they were close to the most critical area in the building.
The area of impact.
Yes.
That's an astonishing number, and hopefully that is because communications have been a problem.
Absolutely.
And people are in places where they aren't supposed to be and haven't contacted work or loved ones yet, but you're saying 3 of 850.
I talked to a senior executive at Cantor just a few moments ago, and that is the current number with which they are working. Now, they have also been having some difficulty with their phone system and asked to share another number that relatives of Cantor Fitzgerald employees can call.
I think I asked them to make a graphic of this number. Okay, let's put that up if we can.
I'll begin to tell it, and if it comes to this area code 203. This is in the Darien, Connecticut offices of Cantor Fitzgerald. 203-662-3600. So that is 203-662-3600 for relatives of employees of Cantor Fitzgerald in the World Trade Center. They can call that number. It's a rollover line. They will get picked up. They will not get the busy signals that have been plaguing communication so far this morning.
When we talk about markets in this country being closed, Ron, are they closed because technically they can't open, or are they closed because of the solemn nature of this incident?
I suspect there's a little of both. We were getting hints from the Securities and Exchange Commission that there might be an announcement later today that trading will resume tomorrow. I have not yet been able to confirm that. I spoke with the head of the New York Stock Exchange earlier this morning, and the expression that they're using right now is as soon as possible. The exchanges and the regulators are meeting to determine whether or not, the systems, as far as we know, are functional. But they're trying to determine the appropriate time at which to open the markets, possibly tomorrow or thereafter.
All right, CNBC's Ron Insana. Ron, thanks very much as always. Now here's Katie.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. NBC's Carrie Sanders is in Florida with some interesting developments that I just told you about. Carrie, can you elaborate on these boxes from this flying school that the FBI has apparently seized?
Well, they've taken all of the records from the flying school, the records that basically fit the dates when these 2 men were attending there, which would have been July of last year to January of this year. It's the records not only of the 2 men, and you mentioned their names, but I'll repeat them, Mohammed Atta, and I'll probably mess up this last name, but the other student who was attending at the same time, who lived with Mohammed Atta and said that he was his cousin, Marwan al-Shahi. Anyway, the FBI took the records of all the folks at the school there, including their pictures of all the students there, and are now going through it. They spent about 3 hours talking to the representatives of the school there, trying to find out as much as they could, discovering that these men came to the school and did not know how to fly. They first got their private pilot's license, and then they continued working straight through to becoming commercial pilots. Now, the training that they got at the Venice Flying School is not the type of training that would train them to fly a 757 or a 767. They would be trained on multi-engine, but not jets, but rather on turboprops. So they graduated with that turboprop rating. According to one of the bookkeepers there, they never had a problem paying their bills. They paid with checks, and it cost about $25,000 per student, and money was never an issue. Meantime, on the east coast of Florida, because that's on the west coast, on the east coast of Florida, in Coral Springs, the FBI went to an apartment that at one time the FBI believes Mohammed Atta lived in. They were in there. They were there for much of the evening last night, leaving at around 11 o'clock last night. They have not returned. but they did apparently enter the apartment and took at least two boxes out of there. And I'm understanding right now from one of our camera crews that's at a different location that they have seen in the Hollywood, Florida area, FBI agents at an apartment complex taking some boxes of evidence out of a different location. And at that location, it's believed that Mohammed Atta and others may have frequented, but we're still trying to get a little bit more information on that information down in Hollywood, Florida. But clearly, the FBI is focusing a fair amount of attention on Mohammed Atta, who sources tell us they believe was on the plane and died in the suicide plane hijacking.
Yeah, well, what led FBI agents to Venice, to Coral Springs, and to, where was it, Hollywood in the first place?
Well, it's a pretty simple thing. Apparently, the FBI agents got the passenger manifest, and when they got the manifest to who was on these planes, and I'm sorry I can't tell you which plane they believe he was on of the four planes, but when they got the passenger manifest, they saw this name, and it put a flashbulb off, because the name is a name that previously had been linked to possible terrorist activity.
Huh.
So when they saw his name, they said, we need to find out more about this person, and that's why they geared up the FBI agents in the field immediately, and they located him in South Florida, and again over on the west coast of Florida in Venice.
Were they surprised, Kerry, that he wasn't traveling under an assumed name?
I think they are, but clearly from what the indications are at this point, you know, these terrorists are not hiding, you know, after the fact or anything like that. I mean, I think that one of the agents told me that what he believes is that they wanted to leave this trail.
And meanwhile, they did spend 7 months at this flying school in Venice, according to these records. And although they were not trained to fly jets, do people believe that what they learned there was easily transferable to, say, a 757 or a 767?
Actually, no, they don't say that it's easily transferable because it's such a different type of jet. But nonetheless, they got that initial training in Venice, Florida. Whether their training continued elsewhere, you know, you have to assume it took place somewhere else. Where they learned it, though, at this point, I don't know, and the FBI hasn't told us.
All right. Kerry Sanders, interesting development down in several places in Florida. Kerry, thanks so much for talking with us.
Sure.
It is 10 minutes before the hour. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you. Clifton Cloud shot some home video of the attack on the World Trade Center. Harry Crosby was on his way to work at Merrill Lynch at the World Financial Center just across the street. Guys, good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Clifton, I want to roll the video that you shot. You were using your home video camera, getting ready for a joyous occasion, your son going to preschool, and you captured that shot right there. How far away from the building were you?
I was probably about a mile away, and I didn't even realize that the second explosion was going on. It was just a quick, sharp blast of white light, orange, and then the shockwave hit a few minutes later.
What did you think when you were shooting the initial explosion, when you were shooting just the tower that had been hit first? Did you think it had been an accident? Did you think there was terrorism? What was going through your mind?
At first I did think that it was either an accident, or honestly, you know, in the city I thought it might have been a film, you know, some effect, something draped over the building or something. It was so surreal that I couldn't imagine that it was an accident.
And it was while you were shooting that the second plane came into view, and as you say, you really didn't even realize what you had captured. What was your response when you went back and looked carefully at the tape?
I thought about where the plane hit was right about in the 60s floor where one of my company's largest clients is, and I thought about the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis that we know, and I realized, my God, that's their floors, their area.
You continued to roll and stood there for a while, I know, and also captured the pictures of Tower Number 2 collapsing. And you've been in New York for a long time, and you remember the Trade Center bombing back in 1993, and I know most New Yorkers and Americans in general were proud to know that those buildings stood. When you saw that building collapsing, what went through your mind?
I really thought that this was something I could never possibly imagine. I remember thinking that it'll be interesting to look at these buildings damaged in the future, and the thought of that building actually coming down and knowing that area so well and knowing how many people are around, I was really, my heart went out for the people who live and work down there, and a lot of people who we know, you know, on a daily basis through work. So it was there was a real human face on that building going down.
Harry, you were walking toward work. the first impact had already taken place, and as the second one took place, an interesting phenomenon. I mean, you found yourself, like so many other people, instead of repelled, walking away from the building, almost drawn to get closer.
Yes, it was, it sounds not intelligent now, but at the time I was very much drawn close. I think people were milling around the building. My first thought was to actually get to my place of work to check on everybody. I saw a lot of familiar faces from both Lehman Brothers, that's right next door to my place of work at Merrill, and a lot of people from Merrill walking the other way, voluntarily evacuating their buildings. But a lot of people stood around, and no one really challenged the integrity or the strength of both those buildings. I think everybody thought that they would stay up. Clearly, it looked like an act of terrorism. This wasn't random. I didn't see the first impact, but I certainly saw the second one. I was on the other side, so I didn't really see the complete hit, but the damage that was done. There were a lot of news crews. There were paramedics, firemen, police running aggressively towards both those buildings. Again, not questioning the fact that they might be putting themselves in peril or in danger.
And as we now know, it's so many of those firefighters and police officers and EMS technicians who were immediately in the area who may not have survived when Tower number 2 came down. There's a horrible image of what you saw above the area of impact when the fire began to force people to the uppermost floors of the tower.
That's right. I think what had happened in the area of impact, these planes were fully loaded with fuel, and there was an incredible amount of heat that was being generated at that area. You could see the flames and the intensity of the flames there, and very, very thick smoke above that. And I think people were driven further north, could not, or further higher in the building.
Is this in tower number, the northernmost tower?
Yes. My view was we were, most of us, on the West Side Highway, and the first view was really the northernmost tower, which went down last. And people were forced up and were jumping. They were forced really to either face heat or smoke inhalation or jump.
And you get the impression these people were not falling. This wasn't some injury that was causing them to fall off the building, that there was some conscious decision here, because you've described and other people have described that in some cases these people were jumping in pairs, in threes.
Yes, they were. They had made a decision to take that approach, and I think they knew that they were gone, that there really was no other choice.
There are some terrible photographs in some of the, and I want to warn people before we put these up that, you know, you may want to turn away for a second, but there are some photographs in the New York newspapers this morning. First is from the New York Times. So this one is actually, from the New York Times, and you can see what Harry was talking about. The smoke probably is just above where the area of impact is, and you can see just dozens of people getting to the windows and probably realizing at this point that the chance for rescue on those floors was very slim.
I think it was impossible for those people to get out of their offices, and it was while people were repelled by it, they couldn't pull themselves away, and people. Many people witnessed this.
Can you even estimate how many people you saw jumping off that building?
I would say there were at least, that I could see, count 50 people at least, and perhaps as many as 100 people jumped.
Again, a picture from one of the New York newspapers this morning. You have to wonder if the people in that tower, which again was the second tower to collapse, had seen or heard the first tower go down. And that perhaps forced them to make the decision they made, that they didn't want to go down with the building.
Yes, I can't imagine what were in their minds. But everybody on the ground, again, did not expect, there was really much more calm than one would expect before the first building collapsed. I think at the time the first building collapsed, then people were clearly evacuated. Police were pushing people north. But at that time, I think up until then, they were making space for EMS and police and firemen to actually get access very close to the area.
Strange part of the story, Harry, you called me yesterday afternoon and told me what happened, and you said that earlier in your life you had actually seen the result of someone jumping off a building.
I was,
It stayed with you for a long time.
Yeah, it took 3 weeks to kind of clear my head, and this is something that, for many of us that work down there, is a life-changing experience. I mean, many of my colleagues saw exactly what I saw. And
Clifton, as a longtime New Yorker, how do you deal with the image as you wake up this morning and you continue to wake up on days to come and you look at the tip of Manhattan and those 2 towers are no longer there?
Well, you know, I realized in looking at the paper today that what I thought was debris falling from the building was probably people jumping, because from my vantage point I could see what looked like debris, and I realized now that it was people, and I think that you know, that's a whole other element to this disaster. But I really do believe that you know, it shows the strength of New Yorkers not to give up. We're not going to go down.
Well, as I said, you were beginning the day hoping to capture some pictures of your son going to preschool, a joyous occasion. Instead, you captured something probably far more dramatic. I hope you went home and hugged your son, Clifton.
I did. I absolutely did, and my wife.
Clifton, thanks for sharing your story with us. Harry, thank you very much. And of course, we're happy that both of you are all right. And our hearts and prayers go out to so many families and so many people who, it looks like, are not all right. We're back right after this.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision.
A second airplane, a 727, just rammed into the building.
Right now, there's a huge gaping hole in one of the towers, and the other building is on fire.
We are back at noon Eastern Time, 9 Pacific, in the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in history, not just on U.S. soil, but anywhere in the world. The last terrorist attack that had that dubious distinction was an explosion aboard India Air, November 13, 1996. 349 people on board that plane were killed. But here are some of the numbers already. 266 passengers and crew members aboard those 4 airlines that were hijacked. So far, about 107 people are presumed dead at the Pentagon, but that is not a complete number. There may be many, many more, because initial reports were that there were as many as 800. And needless to say, hundreds of people are still missing. Thousands of people have been treated in area hospitals here in New York who were in or around the World Trade Center when the planes crashed into the building or when the 2 towers came crumbling down. I'm Katie Couric along with Matt Lauer, and we are still completely stunned by this turn of events.
You've been talking about some of the physical damage that took place because of this several-pronged attack, and the deaths in Washington and the deaths here at the World Trade Center and the deaths outside of Pittsburgh, which we shouldn't forget. We haven't talked as much about this morning, but then there is the other element of terrorism, and that is the emotional damage. And as people wake up and look at the forever now changed skyline of New York City and imagine how our lives are going to be forever changed, and some of the freedoms we take for granted, we may no longer be able to take for granted because we'll have to take more precautions.
Well, it's a day that lived in.
This is a News 4 special report, Attack on America.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Kidd. We want to bring you up to speed on what's happening locally in this day after the worst terrorist attack ever in this country. While Washington and the rest of America struggle to regain some of the normalcy of daily life, it is scenes like the devastation at the Pentagon reminding us that it will be a slow process. And as District Police Chief Charles Ramsey has said, some things will never be the same. The District of Columbia remains in a state of emergency. Mayor Williams is in an emergency cabinet meeting with his top advisors. Security remains tight around the city with a heavy police presence and extra security precautions at military installations all around the area. U.S. airspace is expected to reopen shortly, but it will take some time for the airlines to get reorganized. We are waiting for the final word from the FAA and local airport authorities. The Pentagon Metro Station has reopened, but no buses are being allowed into the Pentagon bus bays. And the National Airport Metro Station is expected to reopen at 3 p.m. That's when the airport will reopen to allow people to get their luggage. As you may recall, people had to leave yesterday without being able to pick up their luggage. The Arlington fire chief says the Pentagon's construction, including a slate roof there, makes it hard to fight the fire that is still burning at the Pentagon. Crews are cutting into the roof to keep the blaze from spreading to the rest of the building. Chief Ed Plower says he has no estimate on just how long it's going to take to get that fire out. Meanwhile, employees who work in the undamaged parts of the building have returned to their jobs today. It's almost an act of defiance for them to go to work in the face of that terrorist attack yesterday. Savannah Guthrie joins us live with the latest from the Pentagon. Savannah?
Well, here, Susan, it's what can only be called a very delicate search and rescue operation right now, also a frustrating one, and as you said, a very slow one. Search and rescue teams have been here since very early this morning, but frankly, it is very hard for them to get to the place they most need to get to, the impact point where that plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon yesterday. It is just too dangerous. The area is structurally unstable. Still, search and rescue teams from Fairfax and Montgomery counties have been through some of the adjacent areas. They are confirming now that they have found some bodies. They have not made any identifications, and they will not give numbers, although earlier unconfirmed reports are saying the death toll at the Pentagon could go as high as 800 people. Obviously, time is of the essence here. The more time passes, the more critical the situation becomes. Anytime you have something of this magnitude, victims in there, if they are alive, clearly are in need of medical help. The search and rescue teams have brought listening devices into the Pentagon, into those adjacent areas, listening for tapping, for voices, for anything, but so far no signs of life.
Not since we've arrived on the scene, although we still feel that there's areas that what we consider viable or maybe a likelihood. It's just so hard to say with the tremendous blast and energy if, somebody could have survived that in the areas that we're looking at.
So we are all bracing ourselves for a long search and rescue. One estimate was anywhere between 3 and 6 days, but clearly could go longer than that. It is painful for everyone in this country today, but probably most so for people who have family inside that building, family inside the Pentagon. We met one of those women today, a woman that is standing here with the media holding her own vigil. She has been here since 1 o'clock this morning. She stands there, frankly, looking stunned. Her husband is a Pentagon worker who is trapped inside that building. Being this vigil here. Why?
For him and other people, for the people who can't be here, and in case he comes out, I'll be here.
Well, as much as it is possible in a situation like this, the Pentagon is trying to go back to business as usual. Many, thousands of Pentagon workers returned to work today, although we should mention that those workers who are in corridors 2 through 6 cannot come to work because the building, those areas, are so unsound and just not safe for anybody to be into. And one final note, Susan, the Pentagon has set up the Pentagon Family Assistance Center at the Sheraton in Crystal City, and this is really just for loved ones, close family members of people who are missing inside the Pentagon to come and get information and support. Reporting live from the Pentagon, I'm Savannah Guthrie. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Savannah. And we should say if there's any ray of light in all of this, it is that estimates of the dead at the Pentagon have changed dramatically over the last couple of hours. We had heard estimates as horrific as 800. Now they're saying perhaps 100 dead at the Pentagon. Of course, we'll keep you posted with that information just as soon as we have it. President Bush spoke from the White House about an hour ago. He described the attacks as acts of war and said he'll ask Congress for emergency money to help victims and to protect the national security.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail.
President Bush speaking a short time ago. We need to tell you that there are wire reports that the Pentagon is evacuating now because the fire there is spreading. No, I'm told it's a false alarm. We apologize. As you've known since yesterday, there's a lot of information coming out, some of it unconfirmed. This apparently is unconfirmed. The fire is still burning at the Pentagon, but they are not evacuating. As we told you just a short time ago, many people have come to work there today in what we call is almost an act of defiance. So the fire is still burning, but there is no evacuation at the Pentagon. In the meantime, Washington Hospital Center is treating 8 of the victims burned in yesterday's attack on the Pentagon. 4 women and 3 men in critical condition, another man in fair condition. Dr. Dennis Wang says some of the patients underwent surgery last night. Others will have surgery today. Dr. Wang says 50 feet of human skin arrived from Ohio yesterday to help dress the burns. He says another 50 feet is being flown in from Texas. The doctor says the patients are at risk of organ failure and shock, and some of them are having breathing problems. The condition of a Virginia state trooper who's been called a hero for his rescue efforts at the Pentagon yesterday is improving. Trooper Michael Middleton was recognized by Governor Gilmore for his heroic efforts during the Pentagon attack, despite being injured himself. The 35-year-old trooper suffered serious smoke inhalation, but he has now been upgraded from critical to serious condition at Inova Alexandria Hospital. 22 people are being treated at Inova Hospital. 16 of them have now been released. Walter Reed Army Hospital has 2 patients. Virginia Hospital Center got the most patients, taking in 42 victims. 9 of those are in critical condition. And there is a phone number for people to call to check on the status of friends and family. That number is 703-558-6763. 703-558-6763. As we said, Washington is slowly trying to return to a routine, if not a sense of normalcy. Tourists slowly streaming back into some of the district's most popular museums. The Smithsonian says all of its museums are open, but they're taking extra precautions today. The Smithsonian has blocked the front entrance to each of its museums with orange cones. Security guards are using metal detectors to check visitors out as they arrive. A Smithsonian spokesman says this is normally an extremely slow week. He says in early September, very few visitors make their way into even the most popular of museums, the American History and Air and Space Museums. The museums open again today. We're now going to rejoin NBC News coverage of this attack on America. We'll be back at the top of the hour with a local update.
Those planes have been taken to 2 hotels near the airport where they're meeting with grief counselors at this hour and airline personnel trying to learn any news of their relatives. Matt?
All right, George, thanks very much. George Lewis at LAX. And just to reiterate, the FAA has extended the flight ban indefinitely. Earlier they said they'd lift it by about noon today. Now it is an indefinite flight ban or ground hold. Katie?
All right, Matt, thanks very much. Meanwhile, NBC's David Bloom is in Lower Manhattan monitoring the painstaking rescue efforts. David, are they making any progress down there?
Well, Katie, they are slowly, ever so slowly. I know you can't see me right now, but we wanted to show you this picture of what's going on here. We are 4 stories up, about 6 blocks north of the World Trade Center, and you're looking at one of the cars, what remains of one of the cars just moments ago pulled out of what's left of the World Trade Center. Now, as I say, we're about 6 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to stand, and we wanted to come up here because these are such chilling and yet dramatic pictures. If we push off into the distance, and keep in mind right now we're on a rickety 4-story fire escape, you can see what is left of the number 2 tower of the World Trade Center, the first to collapse. You can see the cranes that they're now working on to try to remove the debris. And the greatest concern that the firefighters, the police, and the other rescue workers have told us about this morning is their concern that other buildings surrounding this area will collapse. That is why the rescue effort is proceeding so gingerly. Here in Lower Manhattan right now, you have, in addition to the firefighters and the police and the other emergency personnel, you've got a number of National Guard troops from here in New York deployed. If we pan down again, you'll probably be able to see the troops mixed in with the relief workers. If you'll notice, most of the relief workers are wearing the masks because the debris has been spewing out even now, more than 24 hours, of course, after the first explosion. Still a very precarious situation here in Lower Manhattan. As to the death toll, we still frankly don't know. Mayor Giuliani came out this morning, held a news conference, said that they still expect the death toll to go into the thousands, but as yet, the casualties number only in the 40s in terms of those actually known dead. We do know that at least 3 people, perhaps more, but we know of at least 3 people pulled out of the rubble still alive, 2 police officers, as well as a fire department official who was rescued early this morning. But that is it as far as the rescues that we're aware of. And again, this vantage point, Katie, should allow you to see the magnitude of the operation that's going on here. Again, 6 blocks looking south. Obviously, all the streets shut off. Obviously, all the markets closed. Obviously, all business activity in this area completely ceased. All the bridges into Manhattan still closed. This truly, and it has been said so many times, but experiencing it firsthand obviously looks like a war zone. Katie, back to you.
You know, David, you mentioned those 3 people who were pulled from the rubble. Was that the police officer who was able to notify people on his cell phone and give the exact location of his whereabouts?
We believe so, although we believe that that may not be the extent of the cellular phone calls. What happened was late last night, when the mayor and the police chief were holding a news conference, they said, we know that at least some people are still alive inside because of the cell phone calls that we're getting. We believe that those are the 2 Port Authority police officers who were rescued. Sadly to say, one of them, we're told, had to have one of his legs amputated so that he could be pulled out of the rubble. Having said that, we know, and again, there's so much sketchy information, so many conflicting reports, but we know of only those 3 individuals, the 2 police officers and the 1 firefighter, to our knowledge, rescued thus far.
Have you been able to talk to any fire department officials, David? Because the toll on the fire department here in New York is just unfathomable. I mean, they've been saying numbers of more than 200 firefighters are missing. I know that we've mentioned as many as 300. There are a number of police officers. I'm not sure what the last number of missing police officers is that we've been reporting.
The last number that I had on that, Katie, the last number that I had on that was around 32 to 37, but again, it could be much higher.
Have you been able to talk to police or fire officials? Because obviously this is extraordinarily difficult for them.
We have, Katie, and I have to tell you, it is so incredibly sad because, of course, what happened was the first units that rushed in to the building, and again, you can see behind me why it's simply so unlikely, perhaps even implausible, that anyone who had raced inside that building to rescue those trapped workers could have come out alive. And we have been talking to them this morning since we first got here around 5 o'clock this morning. And obviously what they're telling us is that they're still numb, they're still in shock. Many of them have lost buddies, have lost friends, have lost colleagues that they worked with for literally years and years and years. And yet they're coming in, many of them without having even a moment off. They're guzzling down a glass of water, a bottle of water, and heading right back inside. But again, for them, the workers that we've talked to, the firefighters especially, it's such a frustrating process because, as we say, they're so concerned, and they have structural engineers in here, but they are so concerned about the other buildings around here collapsing that they're literally creating wide swaths of area that are cut off from where the firefighters and the other rescue workers are allowed to go. So they go into what they hope are collapsed pockets. Essentially, their hope is that there are basement spaces, people who might have been underground, trapped, for example, inside the subways, that those are the best hope for survivors, but it is an agonizing, brutalizing process for these men and women. But I can tell you what, they are out here doing a valiant job. You see every single one of them just working as hard as they possibly can. You can see all the activity going on here. They literally come streaming out, grab a quick bite, grab a quick drink, and head right back inside, Katie.
All right, David Bloom. David, thanks so much for that report. Now, here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thanks. In Washington, D.C., they're not only dealing with the tragedy at the Pentagon, they're trying to lend federal assistance to rescue efforts, and of course, they're trying to figure out who did this and how to respond. President Bush held a press conference a little earlier saying he'll be asking Congress for money to recover from the tragedies and to protect the nation's security. NBC's Campbell Brown's at the White House with more on that. Campbell, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Well, for about the last 45 minutes, the president has been meeting with congressional leaders. This is a bipartisan meeting, both Democrats and Republicans. The White House describing it as a unity meeting. They were invited here to show a sense of solidarity, that all the leaders here in Washington are working together to try to resolve this situation. We were allowed in at the very beginning of that meeting. It was a very solemn scene with neither the president nor any of the lawmakers making any comments. We do expect to be hearing from the members of Congress, though, a short time from now as that meeting wraps up. We'll also be seeing the president and First Lady this afternoon taking part in a blood drive here in the White House Secure Complex at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. Again, a symbolic show to the American people and to the victims of this tragedy. The president calling on all White House employees to donate blood. Matt, he has, though, spent most of the morning meeting with his national security team, including a formal meeting in the cabinet room with his team this morning, where he did make some remarks, again, making it very clear that the United States is preparing a strong response. The president this morning calling the attack, quote, acts of war. And here's some of what the president had to say earlier.
Attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve. But make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
And you heard the president there saying that he would be asking Congress for emergency funding authority. Well, you'll remember the budget battles that were consuming Washington just a few days ago, with Democrats charging the president would be tapping into the Social Security surplus, Bush pledging he would not do that except in the event of an emergency. White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer said this morning, quote, "This is the definition of a severe emergency." And as you heard the president say, we're prepared to spend whatever it takes to get beyond this and to help the victims. Katie?
All right, those arguments seem to be a distant memory at this point in time. Campbell Brown. Campbell, thanks very much. We'd just like to update you. Pentagon officials now say that the fear of fire spreading no longer exists. The fire is in fact contained. Firefighters continue to put out hot spots on the roof, but the building is no longer being evacuated and people are coming back inside. Meanwhile, NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent has been following events over the last 24 years. That, of course, is NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, what's the latest?
24 years and 24 hours as well. It seems like longer. It is an extraordinary process here. Katie, what intelligence officials are doing right now is reviewing all of the possible signals or cues or warnings that might have come in over the last days and weeks. And what you're talking about is, and the way they describe it is, it's like trying to sip a glass of water from a fire hose, because all of this stuff is coming in. It's coming in from diplomatic reports, from press reports, from electronic intercepts, something that someone may have said to another person, or an email or a chat room. I mean, enormous amounts of material also coming in from satellite electronic intercepts, as well as other kinds of intercepted communication. And all of this has to be sorted. It is not all analyzed in real time by topic or keyword. They do key onto certain things, but not everything is analyzed as it's coming in. So now what they have to do is sort of figuratively re-rack those tapes and look back. Of course, all of it is captured on these computer chips, and now have to go back and see, is there something, for instance, like the terror threat that had been suggested a couple of weeks ago against U.S. facilities, possibly in Japan, which put our military there on a high state of alert. That turned out to be either a foiled attempt or a failed attempt or a false interpretation. They have to look back at their analysis, Katie, and see, did they get that wrong, and was it really something that was directed against the United States itself?
So, Andrea, they're looking back on what they might have missed. Meanwhile, are State Department officials looking forward as to what they need to analyze and evaluate in the future to prevent this from happening again? Is there rethinking about the way intelligence is being gathered?
They're rethinking the big picture, but they're also looking forward in terms of how do you build a case against whoever did this, and their chief suspect is Osama bin Laden, and how do you also send signals to other terror groups, collateral groups, not to perceive us as being vulnerable at this time. So now they're looking to see if they can intercept communication from other suspected groups to make sure that another threat isn't developing from somebody who might have a sense of bravado or a sense that the United States is slightly weaker in this instance. And they're approaching things diplomatically to make sure that, especially at this time, when the United States is so associated with Israel in the view of many people on the street in the Arab world, that they communicate to moderate Arab leaders, at least, that if they do retaliate, this is a targeted retaliation against terror groups. It is not anti-Arab.
So Andrea, is the trail still leading to Osama bin Laden at this point? I know that yesterday, even yesterday afternoon, some high-ranking U.S. officials who were unnamed said they were 90% certain that this was in fact the individual behind this. What is the thinking? Is it, do people feel even stronger about that today?
They do, and Katie, a lot of it is by simple deductive reasoning, that there are no other single players who they think are capable of this, and they have other means, diplomatic and electronic means and human intelligence, to know to their satisfaction so far that this was not some other terror-sponsoring state. They've seen in the patterns of terror that they analyze constantly that this is not something that Iraq would do, not something that Iran would do, clearly not Iran with the movement and direction of Iran. Libya came out and condemned this act of terror, so that's why they're focusing on bin Laden.
All right, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, I met 24 hours, 24 years. I made you much older than you really are. Thank you very much. Thanks for that report, Andrea. Anyway, now with more, here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you. In 1993, former New York City Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly earned high marks for his handling of the World Trade Center bombing. He's with us now with more insight into how the police will handle yesterday's attack. Ray, good to see you.
See you, Matt.
1993 was a huge bomb that went off in the basement, the garage area of the World Trade Center, and you said to me a second ago, you didn't think anything could bring that building down, much less a plane.
Absolutely. No, this 93 pales in comparison to what happened yesterday. No, the terrorists in 93 tried to topple both buildings, one into the other. Obviously, they didn't succeed. And when they didn't do it at the base, you would think, not being an engineer, that they certainly couldn't do it from that higher level, but obviously that's not the case.
Immediately following the explosion in 93, police officials, FBI officials set out to find out, they knew it was a bomb, find out where it was placed, who put it together. We know a little bit more about this particular attack. We know that it was done using airplanes, but we still have some questions to be answered. What are police doing right now? What's the game plan for a disaster like this with the New York City Police Department?
Well, obviously, rescue is the primary mission. Police and fire, that's goal one, is to rescue anybody that's still alive there. And you do that until there's absolutely no chance of anybody being alive. On a parallel course, you have an investigation that's ongoing. That'll probably be done primarily by the Joint Terrorist Task Force, headquartered here in New York, FBI, New York City police detectives. That gives it national, indeed international reach. So I'm sure that's what they're doing. They're looking at the specifics of the hijacking. I'm sure there are people in Maine. We've gotten information in Florida. Obviously, warrants are being executed. So those two efforts are going on simultaneously.
The initial reports, Ray, up to 33 members of the New York City Police Department unaccounted for. You hate to, but you may have to assume the worst there, that they were awfully close to that building when it collapsed. What kind of impact does that have emotionally and logistically on a police force?
Well, it's devastating, no question about it, emotionally. But the people who are missing are primarily members of the emergency service unit, which they're highly skilled, they're very well trained. And of course, in the fire department, it's the same thing. You have the rescue units that are very, very highly trained. The rescue units just cannot be located. Nobody, members of rescue units, can be found. So it's tremendous devastation. But these are the two finest rescue organizations in the world, in my opinion. New York City Police Department and Fire Department. They have a tremendous amount of experience. The Police Department has 40,000 members. The Fire Department has, with the EMS merger, about 15,000 members. So they physically have the resources to do the job.
Yeah, but emotionally, you know, their job is to protect the people of New York City, and what we've seen is that there isn't a police force in the world that can protect and do anything about the vulnerability we've seen in this last 24 hours.
Absolutely. No, this is, as far as protection is concerned, this is a federal government responsibility. Municipalities can't do that, and I think we have to take a real hard look at our intelligence gathering capability.
Something else, by the way, you have to keep in mind is that while you're throwing resources, and you have to, down to the World Trade Center area, this is a big city, and life continues in other parts of the city, and you can't pull the police off those streets to put them down at the World Trade Center.
Absolutely. It's one of the major challenges, and if you go down towards the site, you'll see fire units from New Jersey, from Long Island, using all available resources. But policing goes on throughout the city. Fire services are provided. This is 319 square miles, 8 million people. They deserve to get the service, and they are getting. I think the mayor has made certain of that.
Talk about readiness all the time. How much can a drill, a basic drill without a catastrophe, prepare a force like the New York City Police Force for what they're dealing with right now?
Well, it can give you a practice in the coordination, in communication, that sort of thing, but nothing this size or magnitude was ever envisioned. There have been some drills about the use of chemical and biological agents. They envision a large number of casualties, so they have helped in that regard. But nothing was thought of in this regard.
On a personal note, I know you live down in that area, not far from the building. You haven't been able to get home, and it's going to be awfully strange to look out the window and walk down some of our avenues and not see those towers looming over this city.
Absolutely. No, every day when I walk out the door, I saw the World Trade Center, so it's going to be just a shock. And it's shocking now to look down the avenue and not see it.
Former New York City Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly. Ray, thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you very much. Needless to say, thousands of lives have been shattered by these attacks on this country. Annalise Peterson is searching for both her brother and her boyfriend who worked in different towers at the World Trade Center. She's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Annalise,
hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My heart goes out to you. I know you're absolutely sick with worry and completely frantic. Tell me, first of all, your brother. Tell me where he worked and on what floor.
He worked on the 106th floor of Cantor Fitzgerald and was a trader on the 106th floor. And I haven't heard anything from, I know that a friend, my boyfriend's roommate had talked to someone at Cantor, or someone that had talked to someone on Cantor on the floor right when the first airplane had hit. And he said that they were trying to get out, but they couldn't get down because they had hit underneath them. But they were waiting and they were patient. And then my boyfriend's roommate went ahead and called my boyfriend who works at Sandler O'Neill, and he lurks on the 104th floor of the World Trade Tower 2. And he said, you know, Frederick, are you at your desk? And, you know, is Freddie at the desk? And they couldn't see him. And this was after the first plane had hit, and they said we're evacuating right now, but we don't know where Freddie is. And knowing him, he was probably looking, oh, look, there's a plane. And so they all tried to evacuate, and then 3 minutes later, after he hung up, the second plane had hit the second tower.
You obviously, Annalise, have spent the last 24 hours trying to locate both your brother, whose name is Davin, or
Davin Peterson.
Davin Peterson.
Davin Peterson. He's 25 years old and 6'5", so 6'6". So he's a pretty big guy. So if you've seen him at any hospital or around, if he's unconscious or anything, please contact us.
And Annalise, I was going to ask you, what have you done in an effort to find both your brother and your boyfriend, Frederick Cox? Have you visited area hospitals? Where have you been? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been contacting all his family and my family, and then there's a center over here at right by St. Vincent's that consolidates all the lists from all the hospitals, and we keep on going in and check. But right now the line outside of it is so long, it's like for family to get in and check the list every hour is getting pretty difficult. So it's hard because there's no consolidated list or a place that you can go. There's no website, so it's hard to find out information. So you want to go down there and dig out through the rubble, but you don't know what to do. You don't know where, you feel so helpless because there's nothing in your power that you can physically do.
You have Annalise, your sister there, who is with you, helping you. So thank goodness you have her as you all look. And I know that we have a number, and I'm not sure if it will be helpful at all. It says the Office of Victims of Crime has established a hotline. Let me give it to you. It's 1-800-331-0075. Our office can get in touch with you and your sister if you can't remember the number. It says you can leave contact information to get more details about victims and survivors. Both of these guys are young men. How old is your brother?
My brother's 25 and my boyfriend's 27. And if you have any information, I'm under the understanding that some of the people at Sandler O'Neill did get down. Sandler O'Neill did set up a hotline as well as Cantor Fitzgerald. We contacted both. And I guess 20 people did get down from his floor. I guess if you had left right after the first plane had hit, you could have gotten down. You had 20 minutes to get down. So if any of those people could contact us and just let me know what was going on, if you knew what Freddie was doing, or if you were working at Cantor Fitzgerald, if you knew what Dowden was doing, if there's any information that you have, just to their whereabouts, their last whereabouts, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, you know, Annalise, what's the best way? I know this is pretty unconventional, but these are very unconventional times.
Yeah.
What is the best way to reach you?
You can call us at our home phone, or you can email
You know
us.
what? Why don't you give it to our producers, and if people have any information
call
and
you
call,
guys
then I
and
can
forward on the message. Yeah.
Then we can pass your phone number along.
Yeah.
Annalise, again, we wish you the very best, and our prayers are with you and with your.
Yeah, we were just talking. I was just saying. They said, "Do you know Katie Couric?" And I said, "Yeah, everybody knows Katie Couric." And we had a conversation about you the other day, Frederick and I, and we were walking up the street. And I said, we walked by ABC, and we said, "Hey, look," and I said, "It's Katie Couric. I once saw her at the Glamour Awards one year." And he's like, "Who's Katie Couric?" And I said, "Everybody knows who Katie Couric is."
Oh, well, I'm so sorry that we're...
And so we walked up to someone on the street and we said, "Now, do you know who Katie Couric is?" And he's like, "Everybody knows who Katie Couric is."
So you made your boyfriend feel very stupid. Annalise, well, listen, I'm so sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances. And again, we're all praying for you that you'll be able to find your brother, who I'm sure you love very much, as well as your boyfriend. And please let us know if there's anything else we can do.
Yeah, and my heart goes out to everybody else as well.
I'm sure. All right, Annalise, thanks again.
Thank you.
Matt.
Katie, bear with me here, because I'm hearing that we're about to talk to a woman named Joyce Carnes, who, from what I've been told, her brother was in the World Trade Center when the collisions or the accidents took place, no accidents, when these terrorist attacks took place. And she is now talking to her brother, or has talked to her brother, on the phone from inside the rubble. Joyce, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fill me in on this. And again, I apologize for not having more information. Tell me what's going on.
Well, actually, my brother was in Wilton, Connecticut, working at Deludi and Touche as a CPA. And I called him and let him know what happened to the World Trade Center. And he was, in 1993, working there. And after the bombing, they had moved it to the World Finance Center. But recently, he's been transferred to their national department in Wilton, Connecticut. And at 11:40, he told his boss while I was on the phone that he was going military to see what he can do to help.
I'm a little confused.
He was in the Marine Corps for 18 years, and he was going to re-enlist.
Okay, but can you tell me, where is your brother right now?
Right now, he went back in the Rebel to see who else he can find.
So he is at the World Trade Center. He's actually searching through the rubble?
Yes.
And the rescue workers are allowing him to do that, even though he's not a trained...
Well, he called me on his cell phone last night at 7:49. He couldn't find any rescue workers.
Okay, so he went in on his own.
Right, and he found 2 sergeants with the Port Authority.
All right. Well, Joyce, good luck, and if you contact your brother, we'd love to hear more about that. We're going to move on to something else, but we thank you for talking to us. One man who knows firsthand the task that lies ahead for emergency rescue workers at the World Trade Center and also the Pentagon is John Hanson. He was the deputy chief of the Oklahoma City Fire Department in 1995 when Timothy McVeigh bombed the Murrah Federal Building. He's at the Oklahoma City Memorial this morning. Mr. Hanson, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
I can only imagine what went through your mind as you saw the horrifying images of both towers of the World Trade Center collapsing yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. You know, it's deja vu all over again. On this site 6 years ago, as you mentioned, we had a tremendous incident. And now, you know, we had a 9-story building that was involved, Matt, and our friends in New York City are dealing with 2 towers, 110 floors each, and it's just incredible what they're facing.
Yeah, it took more than a week in some cases for you to get through the rubble and find people who were or were not alive, and you can only estimate with 110-story buildings how long it's going to take rescuers to pick through this debris.
Absolutely. It took 17 days working 24 hours a day right here on this site 6 years ago. And now these men and women are facing a month-long, at least, maybe more than that, situation. And then you compound it, as you were talking to the police commissioner, you compound that with over 200 New York City firefighters and public safety officials that have become victims of this, losing their chief, some of the top officials. The same team that the former commissioner spoke of was here in Oklahoma City helping us. You know, we know these men and women that have been involved in this and are missing right now. And our heart certainly goes out to them, and we hope that America will support them as they supported us. I know Oklahoma is certainly standing ready to support our friends in New York, and one thing we've got to realize is it is going to take a long time. So we have to be patient with the rescue workers and give them all the support we can.
It's a very delicate process, John. I want to talk about the fact that there's a similarity in this situation in Oklahoma City, and that the floors of the building pancaked. One fell on top of the other. And I remember that during the rescue operations in Oklahoma City, there were many occasions where rescuers had to stop and pull back because they found some instability in that structure.
You know, I think that we heard last night reports coming out of the building that they've already faced those problems, and that's why that a lot of the rescuers couldn't approach different positions in the World Trade Centers. Countless times we had to stop, pull back, reevaluate. You know, if I could characterize it, you know, take a pile of pickup sticks, if you will, and dump them off the ground. Every time you take one out, there's a chance of moving another. It's going to be something that takes a long time. They're going to have to be so careful moving a piece of concrete or a piece of steel, being very cognizant on what's happening on the other side. You know, will our rescue effort cause a secondary structural collapse? So it is going to take time, and we as Americans right now just have to be extremely patient with our rescue workers.
And John, talk about the emotional side of this. Obviously, the family members of those who've lost loved ones in this tragedy are going to need all of our prayers and emotional support. But there's another dynamic here, and these rescuers are going to be seeing some horrific sights. And take me back, if you will, to what happened in Oklahoma City and the toll that some of those images took on the people who were doing the rescuing.
Well, you know, Matt, as you mentioned, that the trauma to the building, we've all seen that on the incredible coverage. Imagine the trauma to some of the people that's going to be in the building. Those are going to be unpleasant sights. As the rescue effort lingers, those sights will increasingly be unpleasant. And psychologically, I know the New York City authorities, Mayor Giuliani, all have incredible systems set up for the emotional well-being of the rescuers. But it is going to be very, very difficult, Matt. And then after the incident, there's going to be a long-term recovery process for all those brave men and women. And one thing you mentioned, the emotional part of the rescuers, the firefighters and police that are working there as we speak. Keep in mind that they're going to be running across, recovering some of the men and women that used to be standing by their side, some of New York's bravest.
So they're going to need some mental counseling, there's no question. If you had any piece of advice, John, for the men and women who are now working so frantically at the World Trade Center, what would it be?
Well, we're just extremely proud of them, Matt, knowing what we faced here, knowing that they were at our side during this event we had right here. And you know, the advice we'd give is that, you know, take it slow. They're the best trained search and rescue team in the country up there. I know Mr. Rawbaugh has sent, I believe it was 12 urban search and rescue teams that were here, and work together, take our time, and let's keep any more of our rescuers from becoming victims.
All right, John Hanson in Oklahoma City this morning. John, thanks very much. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Matt.
All right, now here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. Coping with disaster is difficult for anyone, and so is explaining it to your children. Dominic Capello is the author of 10 Talks Parents Must Have with Their Children About Violence. Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, one of the things, as Matt was talking to John Hanson, that probably these rescue workers need to do is to talk to somebody, or, you know, don't internalize all this incredible trauma that they're experiencing as we speak.
Absolutely. I think that, well, first, no one is prepared for this. Emergency workers are not prepared for this. I don't think any parent in America was prepared to go to war the way we did, and so I think every parent is struggling on what's the right thing to do. The first thing to do is to communicate how you're feeling, and a lot of people are feeling very scared. A lot of people are very frightened, and that's something you have to talk about.
Okay, well, let's talk about talking about that with your kids.
Sure.
And I have a 10-year-old, so I have to tell you how close to home, because we had a very difficult night last night, which we'll get to in a moment. But are you saying that parents should be open with their children about how scared they might be? Because I have to say that this was extremely unsettling for me, as it was for so many people across the country. And I'm feeling very vulnerable. But you want to reassure your children, don't you? You don't want to tell them how scared and nervous this all makes you, do you?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. Our center was getting calls all last night, and a mom called and said, you know, is it okay to tell our kid that we're scared? And they weren't sure. Another mom called and said, is it okay if our kids see us crying? And because parents were around the TV set, and this family in Brooklyn the dad was scared and the mom was crying, and they felt like it's okay to communicate this as long as the kids know that we're here to protect you. I think kids are looking for some security right now. They don't want their mom and dad to go to work because mom and dad may not come home. They don't want their uncle or grandpa to get in an airplane because they don't know what's going to happen. So kids are looking for security. Parents certainly want to be able to say that, you know, something really bad happened. This doesn't normally happen. But I think it's appropriate for any adult to communicate some fear and some sadness.
How honest should we be? In other words, I struggled with that last night too, how much to tell. My 5-year-old is happily oblivious to most everything, but my 10-year-old is very aware of what goes on around her.
Sure. It depends on the age. It depends on the age of the child.
Should you be honest? Should you say 4 planes were hijacked? Terrorists used them as missiles. They crashed into the World Trade Center. One crashed in the Pentagon. One just crashed. I mean, that's pretty tough stuff.
It's really tough stuff. A mom, I called the Upper West Side and said, what did you do? She goes, well, I decided I would tell my 6-year-old something because I know when he goes to school on the playground, there's going to be talk, there's going to be jokes, and I want him to hear from me. So she decided not to be totally honest, but said something bad happened. There were some bad people. We're going to catch those bad people. A lot of people were hurt. And she understands that this is the beginning of a conversation, Katie. This is not something that you have the talk tonight and it's over. You know, we Americans now have weeks, months, a year to try to find a way to talk about it. It's not easy.
It really isn't. And of course, many children today are feeling extremely vulnerable.
Yes.
And, you know, there's that natural human sense of relief if it wasn't you or your family or your parents or people you knew. You're sort of, phew. But many children are worried, could this happen again? Could this happen to us? And last night my daughter asked me, Mom, are they going to bomb us? Is something going to happen to us? And I said, no, don't worry. You're okay, we're okay. She said, how do you know? I mean, and the question is, how do you know?
Well,
and how can you be honest about that?
And I think this is tough, and this is something every family will struggle with. And I'll be quite candid with you. I work in the field of violence prevention. Something like this, we're not prepared for this. This is a whole new ballgame for those of us who are educators or therapists or community people. I think you're doing what you want to do. You talk to your child, you give them as much love as you can every single day. And
you listen to their concerns and try to address them, and you try not to dismiss them. Isn't that good advice? Because you have to at least be open to what frightens them so you can deal with it properly. You can't say, oh, you're being silly, that's ridiculous.
No, and some kids will act out. Some kids will say it's no big deal, or they'll even make jokes on the playground. But you know, all of us, adults and children, have our own way of coping with our emotions and our feelings. And so we're going to have to be very patient, very patient.
But I want to emphasize again, Dominic, that we probably need to tell our children this is a very rare occurrence.
Absolutely.
This is highly unusual. This has never happened before. And the likelihood of happening again is quite slim. Can we safely say that?
You can absolutely say that. It's very, very slim, and this is also a time for us to think about our own beliefs and our faith, and you know, bring our families and communities together.
It might be a time that if you don't always go to church, to go to church.
Absolutely.
Or
My
go
sister
to
called and said we're all going to church. Actually, they were going to go last night, and they're going back on Sunday. Whatever your faith may be, this might be a very good time to bring the family together.
It might be a good time to bring the school community
Absolutely.
together.
Got a call from a PTA mother in Maryland who said, should we have our PTA meeting tomorrow night and bring parents together? That's an excellent idea.
Now, some families are, of course, are not just feeling vulnerable, they're feeling completely shattered because they've either gotten terrible news about someone they love very much, or they have no idea. As we just spoke to that, you know, young, beautiful woman who can't find her brother or her boyfriend, Annalise. I mean, those people need real professional help.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Professional therapists are going to be needed, as well as the clergy. People of faith will be needed for weeks and months to come.
So we need to emphasize that if anybody is in that situation, to please go get some mental health help.
Call for help. This is not a time to be alone. This is a time to be with family and community, and professional help is available.
All right. Well, Dominic Campello, thank you very much. We probably need to have you on in the upcoming days and weeks because this is not going to go away. Thanks very much. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thanks. Ever since yesterday morning, the nation's air traffic system has basically been shut down. We had expected some airports to open at about noon Eastern time today. From what we've heard, that has not happened. We're going to get an update now on what we may expect over the next several hours and even days from Bob Hager, who's in Washington. Bob, what have you been hearing?
Matt, bit by bit, this is dribbling in now. Delta has just put out a statement that they won't try to operate any flight at least until after 6 p.m. tonight, so that includes all Delta regular flights, their commuter lines, and the Delta shuttle as well. Continental has put out a statement saying it will operate only minimum number of flights today, and I think one by one we're going to see all the airlines fall in line here. Midway, meanwhile, which was already struggling and operating, had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, they said they're just going to suspend business completely. In part because they believe that it won't pick up now for quite some time because of passenger resistance, so worrying about terrorism.
We're talking about domestic flights for the most part here. Bob, what about international flights?
I think that'll be part of the same rule, that nobody's going off until at least after 6 p.m. tonight. Now, I say nobody. These airlines are one by one saying this, Delta and Continental, but I expect other airlines will follow suit, and we're going to see very few operations until after 6 p.m., and then, even then, maybe not much at all. So it'll be another day before things start to resemble normal at all.
And briefly, if you will, Bob, once flights do resume, we're going to be seeing some different and much more strict procedures at airports.
Oh, absolutely. More identification of passengers, and no curbside baggage, and things as small as, well, small, it could be big. No sale of knives or even plastic knives at airport shops, as I understand it.
All right, Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Really quite staggering, Matt, when you think about all the safety precautions that have already been put in place, you know, in the heels of this, and no wonder the airlines are not open for business yet, because they're going to have to make several adjustments, and probably even more in the future.
And you'd hope, as you mentioned before, that people don't complain about these extra inconveniences because they are simply being put into effect to protect all of us.